wheels and tires of a plane are in use only a small part of the actual flying time during landings and takeoffs. But for these brief intervals, every factor affecting the safety of the pilot and plane must be given careful attention in service. The wheels and tires are important among these factors, and if they show any damage or wear, they must be replaced. To remove a main wheel from the P-39, the brakes must first be set or the wheels shocked, and then the fairing is taken off. It is fastened at the hub and up on the strut fork by a yoke. Here, first pull the cotter key, and then back off the high castellated nut. Sometimes it will be necessary to drive the bolt through. For this, use only a composition mallet. There are 2 spacer washers between the yoke and the fork. Be careful not to lose them. Then the hub nut is turned off. It is cotter keyed and spaced with a large washer. There is also a spacer washer between the fairing and the wheel. With this fairing removed, the wheel is jacked up. The jack is slid into position under the fork, directly in line with the jack point. This point is clearly marked, and jacks should only be applied at this point. Raise the wheel until it is clear of the ground. Next, loosen the 3 screws which hold the wheel dust cover in place. They are turned out far enough to allow the cover to be removed, but the screws themselves remain in the cover. Then remove the bearing dust cap and pull the cotter key on the large axle nut which holds the bearing and wheel on the axle. With the nut turned off, remove the retaining ring for the bearing. Then carefully work the wheel partly off the axle so that the bearing itself can be taken out. Wrap the bearing in a cloth and set it aside. And now the wheel can be taken off. Be careful to pull the wheel straight out so as not to damage the axle thread. To remove the tire from the wheel, all of the air must be let out. The removable rim is first worked loose. You may find it a little stubborn, but a few taps with a mallet usually does the trick. It is forced down far enough so that the lock ring on the wheel which holds the rim in place can be removed. Then remove the rim. It must be pulled up evenly so as not to bind. It should be pulled straight off. To remove the tire from the wheel, you'll find it easier if it is first turned over. Then, applying pressure, the bead of the tire is worked free. The tube is taken out and the tire casing is carefully inspected for internal bruises and cracks and external cuts. To replace the tube, it must be deflated. It is laid into the casing here with the valve stem pointing downward. The wheel is slid in place with the hole for the valve stem properly aligned, and the tire is set on the wheel. The rim is next replaced, and the slots for the turned-down end of the lock ring are lined up. The rim is slipped on and pressed down so that the lock ring can be set in its groove. Carefully inspect the turned-down end of the lock ring and the groove to be sure there are no burrs or cracks. The rim is pulled up evenly over the lock ring so that it fits into the groove on the inside of the rim. This locks the rim in place. Check the valve stem for proper position, and the tire is ready to be inflated to the proper pressure. Before the wheel is replaced, the bearing must be carefully cleaned with carbon tetrachloride. Thoroughly clean as well the brake disc slots on the wheel, removing all dirt and grease. The brakes here are a series of friction discs, some stationary which fasten to the axle, alternating with others that rotate with the wheel. These must be lined up with a straight edge so that they will slide into the slots on the inner rim of the wheel. Inspect the assembly carefully at this point to be sure the wheel is home on the housing. With no bearing to support the wheel on the axle, hold your knee against it until the bearing is replaced. Unwrap the bearing and inspect it for wear, then lubricate according to the directions given on the wheel fairing. It is important to remember that the proper amount of grease must be used. Carefully seat the bearing and replace the retaining ring. The axle nut is turned down and tightened fully. Then back it off one castellation so that the wheel will turn freely. The noise you hear when the wheel revolves is the brake discs turning against each other. The cotter key is fixed and the bearing dust cap replaced. The wheel dust cover is replaced, lining up the small access door with the valve stem, and the 3 screws are fastened. Next, the spacing washer is put back, and then the fairing is hung. The jack can be let down and the operation is completed. To remove the nose wheel, set the brakes or chock the main wheels and jack up the nose of the plane. Here, regulation Army Air Force jacks are used. First, remove the safety wire which ties through the fork and the axle nut. Then the nut is turned off. Before the nut is fully backed off, tap it with a composition mallet, driving the axle through the fork so that it can easily be pulled out from the other side. Support the wheel so that its weight is taken off the axle, and the axle can be pulled through. Whenever parts are removed in the field, you will find it saves time and parts to keep them all together in a safe place. On either side of the wheel there is a spacer. Keep these with the rest of the parts. To remove the tire from the nose wheel, first unfasten the dust cover. It is in 2 sections and is fastened with 3 round head screws. Remove the valve cap. And with a pair of pliers holding the valve stem on the flattened sides, turn out the stem, deflating the tube. The valve stem for this tube is of a special double valve arrangement to prevent loss of air pressure should the tire creep on the rim and damage the stem. The top part is a standard valve core. At the bottom, below the threads which fasten the valve to the tube, is a rubber gasket which seals the air vent when the valve is fully tightened down. The tube can be inflated only when the stem is backed off at least 4 turns so that the air coming down through the small holes will enter the tube. If this is not done, the rubber valve connection will burst. Press down on the tire, forcing all the air out. Then unfasten the dowel pin which holds the removable rim in place. It is secured with a cotter key. With the cotter key removed, the pin can be pushed out. With the rim down, the lock ring, similar to that on the main wheel, can be taken off. Lifting straight up, the rim is then removed. To remove the tire from the wheel, the tube must be inflated. The valve is replaced and screwed in only 3 or 4 turns. Enough air is pumped in to round out the form of the tube so that it will slip over the hub. The hub must be forced through the tube. It's a tight fit and will take a little convincing. The small box, if available, will come in handy here to support the tire, but 2 pieces of wood will do just as well. Then remove the valve once more and force all the air out so that the tube can be removed from the casing. To replace the tube in the tire, force out all the air and fold it over so that it can be worked into the tire. You will find it easier if you stand the tire on edge so that you can work from both sides. Replace the valve and inflate the tube, rounding out its form so that the hub can be inserted. Then carefully wipe the hub clean. It lies in direct contact with the tube, and any abrasive or foreign substance might result in damage to the tube. The valve, which protrudes at an angle, must be aligned with the hole in the hub. hub is carefully forced through the center of the tube. Be sure the valve lines up with the hole. When the hub is in place and they are properly aligned, remove the valve and insert it through the hole, turning it back into place. Working on the floor once more, first replace the rim. The holes for the dowel pin must line up. Set it in place and depress it so that the lock ring can be reset in its groove. Pull the rim up over the lock ring and insert the dowel pin. It is safetied with a cotter key. To inflate the tube, the valve stem is best reached with an extension filler. The extension is turned on the stem, and then the air filler is applied. Be sure that the valve itself is 4 turns short of being fully tightened so that the air will enter the tube. Inflate the tube to the proper pressure required for that particular type of tire. The extension filler is then removed and the valve stem is turned down the final 4 turns, seating the bottom valve tightly. And then the cap is replaced. Next, refasten the dust covers with a small section over the valve stem so that it may be reached when the wheel is on the plane. In order that any creeping of the tire on the rim may be detected, an alignment mark is painted across the rim and tire. And now the wheel is ready to be put back on the plane. The spacers on either side of the wheel must be thoroughly cleaned. They go in dry, and any grit or foreign substance will damage the fitting. Lift the wheel into position, lining up the spacers with the force. The axle, too, must be thoroughly cleaned before it is inserted in the force. The axle nut is turned on and tightened down. The nut is then safety wired to the fork. Using a heavy wire, thread it through the hole in the nut and through the hole in the strut fork. The wire pulls the nut in a clockwise direction, resisting any tendency for the axle nut to loosen. This completes the work on the nose wheel, and the jacks can be let down.